Hi, I'm Michelle Chalfant, psychotherapist, holistic life coach, and human just like you, learning to navigate life's challenges. With over 25 years experience, I teach people how to get healthy using the adult chair model. The adult chair model is where simple psychology meets grounded spirituality, and it teaches us how to become healthy adults. From anxiety and depression to codependency and relationship issues, you can use the adult chair for just about anything. Each week, I share practical tips, tools, and advice from myself and a wide range of experts on how to get unstuck, how to live authentically, and how to truly love yourself, all while sitting in your adult chair. Welcome to the Adult Chair Podcast. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Adult Chair Podcast. I am Michelle Chalfant, and today we are talking about all things meditation, loving kindness, and mindfulness with one of the great master teachers out there, Sharon Salzberg. She is one of my favorite people. I followed her for many, many years, and it's an absolute honor to have her on today. So I look forward to you hearing this show. It is going to be amazing. I can already feel it. Welcome to the show, Sharon Salzberg.
Thank you so much. It's so nice to see you.
Yeah, you too. As I said, it is truly an honor. You are someone that I have followed for so many years, and I was just delighted that you said yes to being on the show. So thank you again. And I would love to start out. I know a little bit about your childhood, and if you wouldn't mind, I think it's important to think about, especially when you share like where you are now, but where you started out, like how, tell us a little bit about your background and your own childhood.
Sure. I mean, like for many people, I had a very kind of disrupted, traumatic childhood.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote a book many years ago called Faith, which was really about my own faith journey and kind of an unconventional use of the word, which is a side note. But in doing that, I looked over my life, of course, and I realized that by the time I went to college, which was at the age of 16, I had lived in 5 different family configurations.
Wow.
Which had been changed through somebody dying, like my mother died when I was 9, or some incredibly traumatic change. And it just happened over and over again. So when I was in college, I think if I was going to try to describe myself in one word, it would be fragmented. I just felt like I was in pieces. And I almost coincidentally took an Asian philosophy course when I was a sophomore. And really, honestly, there was a philosophy requirement. I had to take a philosophy course. And as far as I can remember, I looked at it and I thought, oh, that's convenient. It fits in with my schedule. It's like on Tuesday. And so I took it, and the course totally changed my life for 2 reasons. One was in the context of the course, when they were talking about the Buddha's point of view about life, they talked about how he said suffering is a part of life. And that's not meant to be like a grim or depressing statement. For me, it was like, welcome home. It was
right.
It felt like it was the first time in my life I didn't feel different.
I was just going to say, it probably normalized your experience. Yeah.
It totally normalized my experience. Like, you belong. This is a part of life. My family didn't look like anybody else's family. I mean, there was so much.
Yeah.
And yet, here it was, like, this is a part of everyone's life, not in the same degree or measure, but it's natural. You're not so weird,
Yeah. And I think that's so important because so many of us feel like we're the only ones, we're
totally.
the only ones suffering, totally. We're behind the scenes and are all living hell in our mind, and it's just us. Yeah. Okay.
Oh, absolutely. And, society kind of supports that sometimes, and our own shame reinforces that. And so that was enormously liberating just for me hearing that. And then what I heard in the class was that there are methods, there are things you can actually do, you can practice, called meditation, that could help you be happier, help you be more at peace. And I look back at this moment because it's like the craziest thing in the world. I don't know how I did it, but at this point I was 18 years old, and I looked around. I was going to school in Buffalo. I looked around Buffalo, New York, and I couldn't find it anywhere. And I didn't sit back and think, well, maybe I'll read more about this, or I'll figure it out in graduate school or something like that. I thought, I've got to learn how to meditate. And that too was a transformational moment. It was like stepping off the sidelines right into the center of possibility. Like And that's not selfish. It's like saying, what can this mean for me?
Yeah.
And that's the right question. And the school had an independent study program where if you created a project that they liked, you could go anywhere in the world for a year, theoretically.
Wow. Yeah.
And I created a project. I said, I want to go to India and study meditation. And they accepted it. So off I went.
No way. So were you there for a whole semester?
In India?
Yeah.
I stayed a little longer than my year, truth be told. But I did go back to Buffalo. I ended up getting 2 years of independent study credit. And I went back to India to continue practicing.
So that's like a really deep calling you had, like a really deep calling. So you read it. I'm wondering, like, do you remember, like, did anyone else in your class have the same sort of like, oh, meditation, like how wonderful?
Not exactly. I mean, I did go with a very small group of people. I didn't go all alone.
Oh, you didn't? Okay.
No, but it was like really a tiny group, and not all necessarily for the same purpose.
Yeah.
But I just look at that moment so often, and I think that's like the moment, you know, when I think in the best possible way, what about me? You know, can I make this real for me and not just admire it in someone else? Or,
wow,
you know, think long ago people did these incredible things. Like, that's the right question. And it's so crazy. Like, I grew up in New York City. I went to college in Buffalo. I'd never even been to California when I went to India.
Wow.
You know,
you went straight to the source of the place where we all learn how to meditate. That's incredible. Yeah. Incredible. So I just had a question and it flew straight out of my mind. Oh, so when you were there, I was listening or read something about your first experience with meditation and how you thought it was going to be so easy. What was that like for you when you were like, okay, this is going to be my answer? And you sit down like so many, I'm going to say almost all of us do. What was that like for you?
Well, I had a very strong yearning for kind of the practical, direct instruction. I didn't really want like a big philosophical overlay. I wasn't interested in a belief system.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't want to have to call myself a Buddhist or a Hindu or reject anything else. I just wanted to know the how to.
Yeah.
And it took me a little bit of time to find it. I found an intensive, kind of an immersive 10-day meditation retreat that began January 7th, 1971, which is when I started. And the first instruction that we received was sit down and feel your breath. Just feel the sensations of your in and out breath. And my first thought was quite contemptuous. I thought, that is so stupid. You know, like
how easy is that? Yeah.
Well, I came all the way to India. You know, where's the magical, esoteric, fantastic technique that's going to wipe out all my psychic pain and help me be a happier person? I thought I could have stayed in Buffalo to feel my breath.
Yeah, right.
And then I thought, how hard can this be? You know, like what'll it be, like 800 breaths or 900 breaths before my mind starts to wander? And to my complete astonishment, it was like one breath. You know, maybe half a breath. And I'd be gone, and I'd be way gone.
Wow.
So it took a while.
So you were there, you said, how many years were you there then?
I was there for over a year. I went back to
Buffalo.
I went back to Buffalo and other places in the States, and then I went back for like another year and a half. So all told, over 3 years.
Wow. So what'd you learn? Like, what was that? What was that? Can you sum that up in a few sentences? But what was that like for you? Like, I'm curious about the pivotal moment when you thought to yourself, I'm in the right place. Like you felt the call to go down there, and then here you are, and you started to meditate, and then you noticed something like resonated or started to change. What was that like?
It was very early on, because part of the instruction or part of the experience is that, let's say you're given an object of awareness, like it doesn't have to be the feeling of the breath. You know, there are many options, but in that case, it was the feeling of the breath. And the idea is to try to settle your attention gently on that object. And then when you realize you've gotten distracted or you've fallen asleep or you've just gone, to be able to let go gently and begin again. Just bring your attention back in a loving way, in a kind way toward yourself. That's the actual training, and that's hard.
Yeah.
You know, it's not a question of, say, accumulating numbers. Like, yesterday I could just be with 2 breaths, and today I should be with 8, and tomorrow I should be with 15.
Yeah.
It's the practice of letting go, which one of my teachers called it exercising the letting go muscle, and being able to begin again. That's why we sometimes call meditation like a resilience training.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's so much not what we think, but the power of that was extraordinary. I think if in all these years of meditating, I think that's the biggest thing I've learned, that we can begin again, that all is not lost, that we don't have to call ourselves a failure, and that harshly judging ourselves for like an hour and a half is actually not onward leading.
Right.
That's not how we make progress. That's not how we change something. That's not how we learn something. That there's a whole element of self-compassion in there that's very, very important. And that's not laziness. That's how things actually get done better.
Right. But how does one, well, so wait a minute. So when did you feel that shift?
I mean, I felt that shift after some time of practicing. And I really do think it's so important because it's been like such a big life lesson, because how many times a day do we have to begin again? You know, like we fall down and we have to pick ourselves up or let someone else help us up. We have to start over, or we have to do a course correction.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Like instantly, anytime throughout the day, we're able to do that every single day. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's when I saw meditation as kind of a life exercise. You know, it's like we do maybe formal practice because that's like the strength training, you know, and then those skills come right into our lives.
So meditation, and I say this to people, it's a like we're talking about, it's a practice. Is it ever something, I know the answer to this, but I want to hear it from you. Do we ever master it?
I don't know that we master it. It's like, I think we learn some very profound truths through it, and then we don't have to struggle in the same way. So, for example, you know, when I first came back from India in 1974, I came back as a teacher because one of my own teachers had told me to teach. And in those days, I'd be introduced at a party or some social situation as a meditation teacher, and people would kind of go, "Oh, it's weird."
Like that's weird.
Like it's really
especially
strange.
It's the early 70s. Like, what do you mean? Yeah.
And these days, well, not that we're having parties right now, but you know, before the pandemic, you know, I would be introduced in that way, and so very often people would say, "I'm so stressed out. I could use some of that." Occasionally, they'd say, "Oh, my partner should meet you. They could really use that." And I'd hear, "Oh, I tried that once. I failed at it." So that becomes a very interesting question, like, because we don't believe you can ever fail at it. So,
exactly. You can't fail.
Yeah. So I'd say, "Why do you think you failed?" And usually they say something like, "I couldn't keep my thoughts from coming. I couldn't make my mind blank. I couldn't stop from being sleepy. I couldn't keep anxiety from coming up." And kind of the framework in which we hold meditation practice is that we're not trying to blank out or drop parts of our experience. We're cultivating the ability to be with our experience differently. You know, we don't have to take every thought to heart. We don't have to follow every thought into action. We don't have to hold on to an emotion as though it's the only thing we will ever feel. We also don't have to hide from it as though it was the wrong thing to feel, you know, so we learn to relate differently to everything. So you cannot fail at it.
So explain to people that don't know, and I'm 100% obviously on the same page as you, but I get the same thing all the time. Well, I can't meditate because I can't stop my thoughts. I'm like, you're not supposed to stop your thoughts. You're supposed to witness. Is there anything else though you can add for people that are listening that might not meditate right now? I would love to hear you. What is meditation? Like, what is the practice of meditation? Is it as simple as witnessing thoughts? That's it. Like, tell us a little bit, or is it more than that?
It doesn't have to be more than that. It can actually, I mean, there's so many methods or styles, but you know, basically it's a skills training. And one of the skills, and often a kind of foundational exercise that's done, is choosing an object of awareness, like the feeling of the breath or a mantra or sound or something, resting your attention on it, learning how to let go and come back, and let go and come back when you've gone off. And so that, in a way, it gives us a lot of energy, because that's a lot of energy we normally disperse. We go to the past, and they say we go often to a place, an experience where we now have some regret, but not in a useful way. To figure out how to make amends or for lessons learned. We just go over it and over it and over
yes,
it and
we
over
do.
it, and we feel drained. And I'd say especially now, and we leap into the future and create a scenario that has not happened and may never happen, and we're filled with anxiety about it. And so huge amount of our life energy is just lost.
Yeah.
And so that first kind of approach is gathering that energy back. And every time we let go and come back, that's what we're doing. And so we end up much more kind of centered and empowered by the return of that energy. And building on that platform, on that basis, we cultivate what is known as mindfulness, which is like a popular word these days, which is like exactly what you were describing. It's witnessing. We may have a strong emotion come up, a strong sensation come up as we're sitting there. And rather than try to let go and just come back to the breath, we make that experience the new object of meditation. So we learn, that's where we learn to relate differently to everything, and we notice, like maybe we have very weird kind of habits in regard to pleasure and joy and wonderful things that come up. We feel we don't deserve it, so we kind of try to tuck it away, or it has to be perfect and it's not perfect enough, so we're judging it, or we hold on, like, I can't ever let this go away, and of course it's going to go away. So
of course,
so we see all those habits, and we learn to loosen the grip so we can actually enjoy the pleasant experience. And certainly we tend to have, just conditioned, very strange reactions to pain.
So
my fault. This is shameful. I shouldn't feel this. I've been meditating all these years. Why is this still here?
Yeah.
I've been, spent all that money in therapy. I shouldn't have this anymore. Or this is the only thing I will ever feel, or I am the only one. So we tend to add a lot of things to what is already a difficult or challenging experience, and learning to hold those experiences more kind of in an atmosphere of compassion for ourselves and presence and witnessing balance is really what we're talking about. So you can't say, I had a miserable meditation because this happened and that happened and that happened, because everything depends on how we were with it.
Do you find that you've clearly been meditating a long time? Excuse me. Do you find that because you've been meditating so long, when you go to a meditation, are there less thoughts? Or are there days with less thoughts? Or like, what's different from when you started way back in India in the early 70s to right now? Like, is it changed much? What's different about it?
There's certainly days with less thoughts, but the first striking difference, I would say, is that I can allow myself to feel what I'm feeling, and there's not that. I was so self-judgmental, and I met a lot of my very close friends in my very first retreat in January 1971, and I'm somewhat famous amongst that group of people for having marched up to the teacher, whose name was S.N. Goenka, and looking him in the eye and saying, "I never used to be an angry person before I started meditating," thereby laying blame exactly where I felt it belonged, which was on him. It was clearly his fault. And he laughed, and of course I'd been hugely angry, but I hadn't been in touch with it.
Yeah.
And once I got in touch with it, I thought, this is wrong. I shouldn't feel this. This is, And so learning to not be so self-judgmental, to allow my experience to be what it is, and realizing that's what gives me choice, is to be able to acknowledge what's happening and see where I want to go with it. Instead of feeling, oh no, and so that's been the most striking difference, is that I don't blame myself in the way I once did, and I feel very empowered by that ability. It's not perfect, but it's better to choose.
Yeah. That was a question I had when you talk about, of course, self-compassion and letting the judgment go. the ego, that's its job, coming from fear, we're going to judge ourselves. So I love hearing you say that can transform. I also love hearing that the guru laughed at you.
Oh, yes, of course. Well, it was pretty funny.
That's so great. Of course, we go up and they laugh because they know we're in the ego, like, yeah, okay,
Mm-hmm.
whatever. So did you find that, so that does shift over time? The more we practice witnessing the thoughts, does it happen automatically that, gosh, they are just thoughts? So therefore, how do we build that self-compassion is what I'm wondering about. Like, how did that happen to you? Is it an automatic thing?
To some extent, it is automatic. Like if you're just doing a method like that platform or foundational technique,
Yeah.
where you have the object of awareness, like the feeling of the breath or the mantra or whatever, and you learn to let go and come back, you're sneakily building self-compassion.
Okay.
Because that's the only way that can actually work. Because otherwise, our very strong tendency is just to go into this litany of self-blame, like, I can't believe I was thinking again. Why am I thinking? And no one else in the room, no one else in this class is thinking. I'm the only one that's thinking. They're sitting here in bliss. I know that I'm thinking, and they're not thinking. Or maybe they are thinking, but they're thinking beautiful thoughts.
Yeah.
I'm thinking stupid thoughts. Why am I thinking such stupid thoughts?
Yeah.
So that not only do we add sometimes a considerable length of time to the distraction, but it's so exhausting. It's so demoralizing that we don't have just the sheer energy to begin again, to start over. And so even just to do that kind of method, you will be developing some self-compassion.
I like that.
There are very specific techniques like loving kindness, which you mentioned.
Yeah.
That really work very directly with that.
Tell us a little bit more about loving kindness.
Loving kindness is its own kind of methodology. It's like a sister practice to mindfulness. And many, many people I know, including myself, do both styles of meditation. And mindfulness practice is really designed, I think, mostly to bring us closer to our experience and to see it more clearly. Because if we're not adding all that stuff, I shouldn't feel this or whatever, we can see much more deeply into what's actually going on. Loving kindness practice is designed, I call it the stretch. It's designed to help us look at ourselves and look at the world from different angles. So it's a very conscious movement from, let's say, for example, when you think of yourself at the end of the day, maybe you have the habit of pretty well only thinking about the mistakes you made and what you did wrong and how you didn't show up in the way you wanted to. And so the practice of loving kindness, where you're actually wishing yourself well, is almost like asking yourself, anything else happened today? Like any good within me?
Yeah.
And then there's the offering of loving kindness. And so it takes
intentionality,
not like, violence in some way. It's not hypocritical or forced, but it's moving from what's more familiar terrain to looking at ourselves, looking at others from a different approach.
So I like that. So it's intentional. Like you have to go in with that intention. You have to look for it. You have to look for it instead of living with that default mode network of always looking for negative, 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 negative.
Exactly.
Okay. I love it. I have a question. You mentioned, of course, you were having all that anger that had come up and you didn't even know it was there. Do you find that when people start to meditate, that emotions start to rise up that might have been once kind of tucked down deep inside?
I think very much so.
Okay.
Not perhaps for everybody. And sometimes people feel, I'm not doing it right. It's not cathartic, And,
yeah.
I mean, you really can't say for sure, but it would make sense, right? Because we're getting a little quieter. We're not as distracted. We're not following distractions as far as we might have. And so a lot gets revealed, including very beautiful things. Some really difficult emotions, like, for me and for many, and also moments of beautiful connection that are quite spontaneous and love, and so many other things arise. And so it's like your world just opens up because you're paying attention.
Do you find, I know Wayne Dyer always talked about the gap, and maybe everyone talks about the gap, but I remember hearing him talk about the gap, which is the space in between thought when there's silence. That's where we meet that greater presence, God, whatever you'd like to call it. Does everyone have that experience in between thoughts at some point or another, would you say? And that's maybe what even keeps us. I know that's for me. I'm like, oh my God, I don't know what that is, but I want more of that. And it kind of keeps us going, right? Does everyone have that at some point? The more they practice, would you say?
Well, I'll give you an answer very strongly rooted in the Buddhist tradition, which is that I think everyone can have that experience, but it's sort of not the point as
No, I
described
understand.
in that system. So it's more like in Tibetan Buddhism, they talk about seeing your mind being like the sky, open and free and unconfined, unconstrained. And all these clouds are moving through the sky. Those are the thoughts, the feelings, the experiences. Some are really like light and fluffy looking, some are more ominous looking, but they're all just moving through the sky. And so that's the space that is more, you could say, like the goal.
Yeah.
Everything can be happening.
Yeah.
But your heart and mind are so open and free that it's not the same relationship as it once was. At the same time, it's also true that I think we live barely on the surface of life ordinarily. And the more we can gather that energy and the more we can concentrate, the more we do have these kind of experiences of like the space between thoughts or all kinds of experiences.
Tell us, I'm curious if you don't mind sharing. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I do. At the same time.
Okay.
If you don't mind. So again, I'm thinking about people listening that had we all have something going on in our childhood. We all had some sort of something, wounding, dysfunction, whatever you want to call it. Did you find that through the practice of meditation, you were able to really do a lot of healing and transforming of self, just using meditation as a practice? Or did you also have to go to therapy for 30 years? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, people ask me, do I need to do therapy and meditate? I'm like, yes, do both. But what do you say about that? Like, how powerful can meditation really be when it comes to our own inner healing from childhood stuff?
I have done therapy. I did it after I came back from India and after I was teaching. And again, it's very hard to say. I think it's played a very, very powerful role in my own healing. And
what has meditation or therapy?
Meditation. Well, yeah, meditation, really. Therapy is seems to me so dependent on the therapist and the style and although when I was writing Faith, I had a very funny conversation that I put in the book with a psychiatrist in New York. We were talking about what was the single most healing element in the psychotherapeutic relationship, as though there were just one. So it was a little bit of a funny conversation. But he said at one point that he said if you put any good therapist up against the wall, they would have to say that the single most healing element in the psychotherapeutic relationship is love. It's the love in the room that is really what's healing. And then I said, because I was writing this book on faith, which I was defining in a certain way, I said, well, for all we know, the single most healing element in the psychotherapeutic relationship is the fact that someone showed up for their appointment. And that's how I was defining faith.
Yeah.
It was like showing up. It was like me.
Yeah, showing up. Yeah.
Saying, I'm going to give it a shot. I'm going to try. I'm going to try to find out how to do this thing. And I thought something gets us out of bed. Something has us believe in a possibility of change.
Yeah.
Something has us believe in ourselves. So that's how I was defining faith. But that book came out on my birthday, and the psychiatrist came to the reading that I was doing.
Wow.
And so in his honor, I read that story. And he came up to me at the end to have me sign his book. And he said, I've been thinking about this and I think you're wrong. I think it's really love. So I wrote in big letters in his book, it's love, Sharon.
Yeah.
And then a friend gave me a birthday party, which he also came to. So at the end of the party, he came up to me and he said, I've been thinking about it all night. And I think you're right, And I'm wrong. And I said, well, give me back the book. I'll re-sign it, So obviously it's not just one thing, but it's an intricate relationship. I will also say that I learned meditation in Asia, and it was, the teacher in a lot of ways served a lot of the function that he, at any rate, the psychiatrist, would ascribe to the therapist. And this is a good teacher, they love you, and they're not in the process of teaching for their own ego gratification. It's for your freedom from suffering.
Yeah.
And they mirror back a kind of acceptance. Like you don't disclose something and have them go, "Oh my God,"
Right.
And it's like that relationship. Meditation was kind of rooted in that relationship, which is not the case in the West anymore.
No, right. Well, what I hear you say is that your meditation teacher was mirroring your true self. And so
exactly.
then you were able to eventually see from their perspective who you really were. You weren't this fragmented Sharon. You weren't the wounded Sharon. You weren't that. You were this beautiful mirror that your teacher was giving you. Which again,
that's exactly right.
Yeah, which again is what a good therapist would do. Or a meditation teacher, or even a good friend if they're skilled at that, just reflecting back who we really are. Why meditate? How's that for a question? For people that are listening that don't meditate now, how can we entice them, Sharon? Because I know a lot of, people say, well, it lowers the blood pressure and helps you sleep, but give us a few ideas on why it's so important. And I want to say something before. When I think about witnessing thought, I think about how powerful this practice is for anxiety, depression, trauma, like all the things that we go through or that we might have gone through that we're in the middle of, honestly, and how powerful in my own life, even that meditation has been. But I'm wondering if you would agree with that, but also why else would people want to meditate, or why, I hate to use the word should, but why is it a beneficial daily practice for people or practice in general?
I think ultimately, in many ways, the process is about connection. It's connecting more deeply with ourselves and having a profound sense of connection with others. And I always think that's like the weirdest thing, because you may be sitting all alone, you may be sitting with your eyes closed, but somehow the process has us forge connections with all of life, with others, even those we don't know, and that doesn't mean we like everybody.
Yeah.
Or we're going to accede to their wishes, but that profound sense that our lives have something to do with one another. So I see the process of undertaking a meditation practice as really like an experiment. Try it, and if you decide it's like the stupidest thing ever, don't continue it. But I also say, if you are looking to assess or evaluate the effect, which I think we need to do, don't look at what happens and say the 10 minutes each day you're devoting to formal practice. Look at your life.
Right.
Because that's where it's going to show. And that's, of course, what we want it to show. I've seen so many people discouraged through the years saying, I still get sleepy, or, my leg still hurts, or whatever. And they're not looking at the fact that they're different with their family. They're different with themselves when they've made a mistake. They're different in a time of adversity. And so that's where it's really going to show. So, there are people who are suffering in some way, and I think it's a worthy experiment to see if it could be of some help. If you have anxiety, is one example. I think it's one of the things that appealed to me is that it's very personal. It's actually very private. Like if you're at work, let's say, if you're working outside the home and with a group of people, and somebody's getting angry and you're getting anxious, or this works for Zoom too. You don't have to like open the closet door and pull out all this equipment and sit down cross-legged and close your eyes and look weird. You could be breathing, and nobody even has to know you're doing it. So this is a set of tools that we can take with us anywhere, that can give us some support in any situation that we're in. I always like that aspect of it. That it's like a skills training that is my own to utilize when I see fit.
And so personal. I love that. You can use it anywhere. You know, you are, you talk about, of course, insight meditation. Um, Tell us what insight meditation is versus just a few others, because I know there's so many, but can you share with us just a few ideas about, what types of meditation there are out there in the world?
Well, the one that I sort of described, where you choose an object of awareness, you rest your attention there, and then you just keep coming back to it, is usually, we call it concentration practice, and it's a part of insight meditation, but it's just like the platform.
Mm-hmm.
And on top of that, we begin to pay attention to physical sensations, emotional states, thought patterns, and that's really the insight meditation. So, and the engine for that is mindfulness, which means being able to be with our experience, I would say, without the intrusion of so much bias, like, I've got to keep this, I've got to push that away, I shouldn't be feeling this or whatever. And so if we can let go of those reactions as they arise and just be with our experience, we've created the relationship that's going to develop into insight. So as one example, I talk a lot about sitting with my own fear, which I've done. And one of the main things we do in mindfulness practice is we pivot. Like, instead of being consumed with interest at what we're afraid of and what we're going to do about it and what steps we're going to take, it's almost like we turn our attention to the feeling of fear itself. Like, what does it feel like? What does it feel like in my body? And what are the what's kind of like the fear movie? What are the component parts? Because a lot of, as you know, a lot of these emotions are very complex. We can see the loneliness within desire. We can see the sadness within anger. And what I've seen sitting and looking at fear is that, despite the world's pronouncement, which is also true, that we're afraid of the unknown, I'm mostly afraid when I think I do know and it's going to be really bad. And it's all the stories I tell myself. That's what gets me going.
Right.
This is going to happen and that's going to happen. And when I remind myself, even in the middle of that I don't know, I feel space. I feel relief. Like, hey, I don't know. And that was a very important thing for me to see.
I love that.
And then, continuing on, we see, I think, some more universal truths. Like, these very powerful feelings are also changing. They're impermanent. We grab onto them as though it was all that we were and all we'd ever be. And really, they are coming and going. And we get all kinds of different insights just from being able to pay attention.
I love that. And then there's a hot one that so many movie stars talk about, of course, is like TM, Transcendental Meditation. And that's where we use a mantra. What are the benefits of that if someone wanted to check that out? What's the difference, I should say, between that and an insight meditation?
Yeah, I mean, I've never done TM, oddly enough.
That's kind of shocking. I'm not going to lie. I would guess you'd have done. I've done it. I've gone through that certification or whatever you do to get your mantra and all. But it is just repeating that one mantra over and over again. So when your thoughts drift, you say your mantra, and then you come back to presence, and then
Yeah, I mean, I so I can't speak specifically about TM, but there are practices that I'm more familiar with where you might use a mantra, or you might use loving kindness phrases like, may you be happy, may you be peaceful.
Yeah.
And for some people, and again, but it's the same skill set. You rest your attention there, your attention wanders, you come back with some grace and kindness toward yourself. For some people, it's an easier way to get concentrated. You're more wakeful. Like loving kindness in particular, where you're saying phrases, silently saying phrases that mean something, like, may you be happy, may you be peaceful, may you be free of suffering, may you be safe, whatever your phrases might be. And what I found, when we meditate, sometimes we're getting calmer, but we're also getting kind of woozy, like this dreamy, drifty state. So it's good in that we're getting calmer, but we could use a little more energy.
Yeah.
And so we work a lot to try to bring that into balance. And sometimes with the breath, you can really just like go into that state, you know?
Oh, yeah.
And what happens for me, say, when I do loving kindness meditation, because that phrase means something, is that if I go into that state, the phrases get garbled. And it's like a big feedback system, like right away, you know? Like, so for example, I was sitting in Burma in 1985, which is where I did 3 months of intensive loving kindness practice.
Wow.
And I would hear myself, as just one example, I'd hear myself sometimes repeating, may be filled with suffering, maybe. And I go, no.
Oh, no.
Maybe
suffering.
Suffering. Or I'll tell you my favorite example of that. Somebody, a friend of mine who's Swiss, came to sit here at the Insight Meditation Society, which is in that direction, doing loving kindness practice. And because he's Swiss, English was, I think, his fourth language. And his phrases, you begin with yourself. So his phrases were something like, may I be healthy and well, may I live with ease. And one day he heard himself repeating, may I be wealthy in hell, and may I live with eels. And because, you know, English is not his first language, he just kept repeating it.
Yeah.
And then he thought, that sounds weird. And he flipped all the way back to Swiss German, and he went, oh, right, you know, so.
I love it.
For some people, because it picks up our energy, it helps balance out that calmness. Using a word or phrase, you know, can actually be an easier technique.
Yeah, I think so for some people. But regardless of what style of meditation people choose, it's kind of the same. You're coming back to the moment. You're still witnessing thought. Like that's the foundation, it seems like, for all of it. Would you agree with that?
I do agree with
that. So listen, I want to ask you about this. Buddhism. Is it a religion or a philosophy? Please tell us, because I hear both, you know, and I'm curious what you would say about that. Because everyone talks about meditation being, you know, well, that's Buddhism. I'm like, what do you say to that?
I don't think meditation actually is Buddhism. I think many people like my generation learned it within that tradition, partly because it was accessible. And the techniques I found very direct. But even my very first retreat, January 7th, 1971, Goenka started out by saying, the Buddha did not teach Buddhism, the Buddha taught a way of life. These are methods of cultivating awareness that are available to anybody, you know, and you don't have to become a Buddhist. There's no such thing in a way, you know?
Right, exactly.
You know?
Exactly.
I don't think of it so much as a philosophy or a religion. I think of it as a psychological system.
That's what I think too. Thank you. I had about over 10 years ago, probably, I had a client that came in and she said to me, I had just one session with her. And at the end of the session, she said, she was in her 60s, I think. And she said, you know, I've been in therapy for 20 years. She goes, this was incredible. Like, I want to start seeing you. This was one of the best sessions I've ever had. We did so much in one session. I said, wonderful. She says, book me out every week until further notice. I said, great. The next week I get an email from her. She says, please cancel all my future sessions. I thought, well, that's it. What, why? Okay. You know, I canceled everything. And then I saw a friend of hers that had come in. And I said, hey, what happened with so-and-so? Like, she was so excited at the end of the session. You know, again, I had no attachment, Sharon. I'm just going to say no attachment to her staying or leaving. But it was curious to me. I said, what happened? And she says, well, she didn't like that you're a Buddhist. I said, what? There's nothing about me being a Buddhist on my web. Like, where would she, I don't even have any idea where she would come up with that. And by the way, I don't think Buddhism is a religion. She was Christian. And she says, well, apparently it's on your website. And I combed through, I said, I don't have that on my website, but I have guided meditations. So there was her assumption. And I thought, but everything we did helps you. We did a guided meditation in the session. And she was so put off by that. And I thought, isn't that fascinating? Because I like what you said. What did you say? It's a psychological
system.
It's a system.
It looks at greed. It looks at hatred. It looks at love. It looks at compassion.
And how is that bad?
I don't know. I mean, I understand the issue, you know, but
yeah.
And I, you know, people ask me if I'm a Buddhist, and sometimes I don't relate to that, you know.
Yeah.
about myself or anything in those terms.
Yeah.
But it's true. I went to India when I was 18 years old, which was a very long time ago.
Yeah.
And I am used to that language, like sometimes it depends on the context of where I'm speaking, but I have to think, do I say, according to the Buddhist psychology, anger often has a kernel of helplessness inside it?
Yeah.
Or do I just say, I believe anger has a kernel of help? But I learned the language within the Buddhist psychological system to look at anger in a certain way. And I think it's a true way.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it's totally inappropriate to even bring it up. But since we're going to be friends, I just say, okay, I'll just say it the way I would say it to myself,
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So why do we suffer? What causes suffering?
Why questions are a little difficult, like
what causes suffering? How about that? Okay.
Actually, I had a teacher, a man named Ninja in India who really emphasized, don't ask why.
I know. And I preach that, by the way. I say this to the people that I teach lectures to. I'm like, throw the question why out. So scratch that. What causes suffering?
I think suffering exists on different levels. I think one of my sayings, in fact, somebody just made me a mug that says it on it. One of my sayings is, some things just hurt. And I don't think it's because we have a bad attitude. I don't think it's because we're taking it in the wrong spirit. I don't think it's because we have to reorder our thoughts. Some things just hurt. But on top of that, we can often create extra suffering. And that is born of our habits, of our conditioning. So everything we might add on to what is already a difficult situation. I had a woman, for example, come to talk to me once who had a horrible tragedy in her life. And it had been like maybe 6 months before. And she said to me, my friends are kind of impatient with me. They think like I should get over it. And this was not a 6-month thing, And then she said, my friends all have golden lives. Nothing ever goes wrong, which I didn't believe for a moment.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And she said, but now I am like the sign of life gone awry, and they feel very uncomfortable around me. And I found myself, those experiences where you just hear these words come out of your mouth. So I found myself saying to her, I think you need new friends.
Yeah.
And then I said, you should meet my friends. They're all a wreck, which is not true. I mean, they're not all wreck, but there gets to be a certain honesty about one's experience. And so look at the conditioning we have. You shouldn't suffer. You should hide your suffering. You should hide them because they're suffering.
Yeah.
So to unpack all that, that's our work. And that suffering we actually don't need, all that extra stuff.
Yeah, I agree. But I think that as humans, we fear all of our, and I don't even like to call emotions negative. They're just emotions. And we have we have a spectrum of emotions from love to fear and everything in between. And as humans, we have the gift and the pleasure of experiencing all of them. But I think humans in general want to go from neutral to bliss and happiness and excitement. But all these, they don't want any part of. But to be fully human, we've got to experience every single one of them. To feel more love, we got to feel more pain. We got to get in there and feel it all and sit in it all. And they pass through us eventually if we stay out of that story and meditate and witness the thoughts, right? I mean, okay, here's a question. How can we become peaceful when there's so much fear and uncertainty in the world right now? Please help us with that.
There's certainly a lot of fear and uncertainty, both internally and externally for a lot of people. I think fear and uncertainty are actually two different things. Uncertainty is a given, and in some ways true. It's been unmasked.
Is that a pun? Are you using a pun?
Oh, no, but that could be a pun.
Unmasked.
There you go. Well, it's been revealed.
Yeah.
But life is pretty uncertain. I mean, one of the things I also say is, when I talk about compassion is we don't all share the same degree of pain, but we all share vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
And whether we realize it or not, I said, any one of us can get a phone call, like a message. And by the time we pick it up, we have a different life than the one we had before.
True.
And that should be the place where we really care for one another.
Mm-hmm.
That should be where compassion comes from, not like I have everything and you have nothing and I'll be kind to you, but
yeah,
here we are in this situation. And there's a quality of peace that comes from getting closer to the truth and not feeling alone.
Mm-hmm.
I really see that. I see that so often these days where I live here in Massachusetts. I've also have an apartment in New York City, which I left on March 14th, just because I was feeling so uneasy. I thought, this doesn't feel good. It was before everything shut down. I came up here with my winter boots and no summer clothes,
Oh, no.
Because I thought I was here for 2 weeks or something, and I'm still here. But as I taught for a few days in New York before I left. I had been in California for all of February and then just a few days in New York City. And I was talking to somebody, I was sitting in the audience before I was going to go up on the stage, and she was sitting next to me, and she was so anxious, even to be in this gathering, which makes sense in retrospect, but she was so anxious, and I offered so many ideas, maybe try this kind of breathing or do this or that. Nothing helped. And then I said, is there anyone you can help?
Oh, wow.
And she lit up. And she said, well, I have this really elderly neighbor and maybe I could do grocery shopping for her. And she was like so happy in that moment. That was a kind of peace. And even though I'm up here, I have so many friends in New York City, and I've heard so many stories like that. Somebody had also an elderly neighbor, and they'd meet every night in the hallway of their apartment building, sitting, way more than 6 feet apart, and just have a conversation. Because as things shut down, he was a person who had normally been very engaged and involved in a lot of things, and was all gone. And so every single night, this friend would meet with their neighbor.
Oh, I love that.
Somebody else told me, I've lived in this apartment for 12 years. I never even knew the names of any of my neighbors. Now we all have one another's phone numbers.
Oh, that's beautiful.
And we check in, you okay? Do you need anything? Is everything all right? And so that kind of coming together and care, I think has brought a lot of peace to people relative to, whatever.
Yeah. Because there is so much fear, but I also hear so much anger. It's so angry, Sharon, right now, and hatred even. Like it's yucky out there. And people ask me, like, what do I do? I'm so afraid, but I love this. How can you help someone else? How can you help someone else? Which takes the focus off of ourselves and the fear and puts it outside. But what about all the anger right now? Like, it's hard. People are saying to me, I don't really participate in social media. I have business accounts, right? But personal, I just don't really go there. Every once in a blue moon, I'll read through a few things, and it's so polar. The polarity is intense, and I feel the energy, and I just jump right off. I go, I don't want to do this. It doesn't feel good. But what do you say to people? Like, what can we do to change that right now? It's really yucky energy out there right now.
Well, again, like anger is a very complex emotion, and I've seen, if I can sit with my anger and pay attention to it, I do see the sadness in there. I do see the fear in there, and I really do see the sense of helplessness in there.
I agree.
And if I can get to there, then again, I just resolve to do one thing, even if it seems very small, because it's like the energy of the anger can be very positive.
Yeah.
And sort of truth-telling, but it's so damaging to oneself in the end. Like I have this book coming out, and I had the thought, I want to quote Gandhi when he said something like, I don't mean feel anger because we feel what we feel, but if we're lost in anger, like really overcome by it, it's like drinking poison, thinking you're going to kill the other guy.
Oh yeah, I love that quote.
Yeah, so because I wanted to use it in the book, I had to source it. So I looked it up, and I didn't see it attributed to Gandhi anywhere. I saw it attributed to the Buddha and Oprah Winfrey, and Nelson Mandela and the Big Book of AA and Carrie Fisher, and I don't know who said it, but it seems very true. So we feel what we feel. So it's not a question of disparaging our anger or ourselves for feeling it, but if we get overcome by it and consumed by it and defined by it, we are going to suffer. And so it's a very delicate thing, but learning how to utilize that energy without being so lost in it is like our task. And I find if I can get to the place of seeing the helplessness, the sense of helplessness, and do something, that it's kind of an appropriate channel for that kind of energy. And I'd also say in terms of social media or media.
Exactly. Both. Let's just put them in the same category there. Yeah.
You have to moderate it according to how you feel it affecting you. I was interviewed actually by the New York Times for this article on doom scrolling.
Oh, wow.
A term I'd never heard about.
I'd never heard of that either. Yeah.
And it's such a great word, isn't it? Doom scrolling. And,
I like it.
The journalist said to me, this certain colleague of yours, of mine, recommended you. So I thought, doom scrolling, what a great word. And so I gave the interview, and then when the article came out, I saw that my colleague was not in there, but I was. And then I thought, why did she recommend me? Maybe she doesn't do it. She knows I do, which is true. I do. So I realized, before the article, I realized I've got to really take care of this. I need some boundaries. I need some sense of moderation. I can't just go, next terrible story, because it's not healthy. It's not useful.
Right. Ooh, I like that. Last question for you. You say real change explores the intersection of activism and compassion that comes from a mindfulness meditation practice. Can you just expand on that a little bit, please?
Well, I think one of the things that we do find is that there is a profound acknowledgement of connection and interconnection that comes just from even paying attention to our own experience more clearly. And I do a lot of work with, we call them caregivers, but it's like medical personnel and ambulance drivers and international humanitarian aid workers and people who are really working to try to make a difference in this world. And I see how important it is for them to have some balance and some sense of self-care. And I obviously do a lot of work with people who are just seeking to learn how to meditate and really want to know how to manifest that in the world. And so social change, I don't think is just, and it's something I try to say in the book. I think it's a very broad thing. We do that through art. We do that through shifting relationships, as well as seeking more systemic change. And so I think the more we truly see interconnection, the more natural it is to just include others in that field of care. And then that takes the form of action.
You just said, pay attention to our own experience. I think, and I'm thinking back to the last topic of being angry and hateful. And it's like, we got to go inside. Like, what are we feeling inside? And I think that when we can get underneath all of that, that's where we're going to change the world. We're going to change the world, but we've got to go inside and get in touch with that we're experiencing. And then there's that, I like this, the intersection of activism and compassion. We can't go there when we're blocked by anger and hatred and fear. So beautiful. Thanks, Sharon. This was awesome.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. How would people find you if they want to learn more about you or the Insight Meditation Center?
Well, my website is SharonSalzberg.com.
I'll put that in the show notes, Sharon Salzberg. Now, do you have anything coming up? Because I know with COVID right now, you're probably not doing anything in person, or are you doing something in person or online?
Everything's online.
Okay.
The book launch is September 1st.
Oh, great. Okay, great.
And what's happening for that, just the literal launch is a 4-part series, which is either me moderating panels with different activists, or me on a panel, or me just talking about the book. And so that's an exciting thing.
Awesome. I will put all of that in the show notes. And I wanted to say thanks again. This was so incredible. Such an honor again to have you. So thanks for being part of the show today.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. All right, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today. I will have everything in the show notes. And again, if you're new to the show, just go to theadultchair.com to learn more about the show and learn more all about living in your healthy adult. And I look forward to seeing you next week, sitting right here in the adult chair.